Good morning, students. Happy Monday. Today, your objective is that you will be able to use a tree diagram to organize and represent outcome in a sample space. So the first thing we need to talk about is some vocabulary. So right here is a picture of a tree diagram. It is used to organize all possible outcomes for a chance experiment that can be thought of as performed in stages that show an event sample space. So a lot of you have seen tree diagrams in science when it comes to working with genetics. Here in light blue we see the first event, and here in dark blue we see the second event. Compound events contain more than one event in the outcome. So I can see here this is the first event, I can see here in the second this is the second event, so this is a compound event. And then finally, sample space is a list of all of the possible outcomes. So in this tree diagram, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different outcomes in our sample space. It's important to note that sample space is not a number. This is not a number. A lot of you on your exit ticket said that sample space was 5. Sample space is not a number. It is yellow and blue marbles, but it is not a number. Okay. Key point number 1 says that tree diagrams are useful for calculating probabilities of events with more than one outcome. And number 2, the probability of each branch of the tree can be found by multiplying the probabilities of the outcomes at each stage. Key point number 2 you're going to get in more detail with on Thursday and Friday, but it is important that you understand it today. Okay, criteria for success. When approaching problems with tree diagrams, first thing you should do is create your tree diagram with your different events. Then you should identify the sample space, so create a list, and then finally create the numerical probability. Now, your Khan Academy assignment will not ask for the numerical probability today, but it will on Thursday. So that's why you're practicing today. Okay, Khan Academy number 1 for the Cardinals. This is our first notes problem for everyone. Please make sure that you have taken the time to write down each of these slides somewhere in your notes. So the objective, the key vocabulary, the key points, and the CFS, I will be looking for those when you submit a picture of your notes on Google Classroom. Number 1 says the Elroy and Rose are at schematic to buy a school planner. There are 3 colors, purple, red, and blue, and 2 formats, lined or unlined. They each create a display to represent the sample space of the random picking of a colored notebook. So we're checking to see which one of these different diagrams represents all of the different possible combinations of notebooks in the store. So let's come over to our notebook paper and create criteria for success number 1, which is our tree diagram. So the first thing I did was I wrote out the first or the different options within the first event. So the first event is to pick your new notebook, depending on the color, which is purple, red, or blue. Then I showed the second event by saying that this is a purple lined notebook. This is a purple unlined notebook. This is a red lined notebook. This is a red unlined notebook. This is a blue notebook. This is a blue unlined notebook. So in the second event, I am modeling either lined or unlined, which means altogether there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different outcomes. Within those 6 different outcomes, there are 2 events, color and whether or not the notebook is lined. So in key point number 2, in criteria for success number 2, I've actually created a list of the sample space. And you'll notice that there are 6 different outcomes, but my sample space is not 6. My sample space is the list that I have created. Okay, now moving on to criteria for success number 3, which is to calculate the probability. What I need to do is I need to multiply the probability of each one of the different events. So if I look up here, the first event that I see was picking the color. So I can pick 1 out of those 3 colors. So I'm going to multiply 1 out of 3 times the probability of the second event. Well, in the second event, you can either be lined or unlined. So this is a 1 out of 2 probability that it will be lined or unlined. So I multiply 1/3 times 1/2 to get the probability of 1/6 for it to be one of these 6 different options. Or I can see and check that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different outcomes, so the probability of one occurring is 1/6. So notice how we used multiplication first to find our probability. Okay, Cardinals, make sure you have the correct answer. They are both correct. Both of the pictures that they have listed there are both correct because they all contain the entire sample space. Moving on to criteria for success number 2, moving on to number 2, it says you are playing a fancy game that allows you to create your own character. There are 5 options for the race of your character, and there are 3 options for the character's main tool. If you randomly choose the race tool, if you randomly choose the race and tool, which of the diagrams can be used to find all of the possible outcomes. So no, these are not tree diagrams, but we are going to use a tree diagram to make sure that the sample space is aligned. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create our tree diagram with our first event. Well, reading back in the problem, the first thing it talked about was the different characters. So I wrote out the 5 different characters. You have an elf, hobbit, human, an orc, or a troll. Then I showed the second event, which is their power. So then from each of these different characters, I listed the different powers that they could have. There are 3 different powers they could have: magic, sword, or swing. So moving on to sample space, criteria for success number 2, I've created my sample space list by saying I could have an elf that uses magic, or I could have an elf that uses a sword, or I could have an elf that uses a slingshot. So on for the hobbit, the human, the orc, and the troll. So all together, I can see that this list contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 different outcomes, okay? So now, checking for my sample space, which one of these 2 options has the same sample space? Well, I need to see that there are, from our sample space, 5 characters. Well, when I look at these different options, along the top here, I see 3 different tools, and along the top here, I see 3 different characters. Well, it can't be B because we have to have 5 different characters, and we have to have these specific outcomes in our sample space. So the correct answer here is diagram A because it has all of the features needed within the sample space. Moving on to problem number 3 on Khan Academy for the Cardinals. Everybody else, please make sure that you have these strategies written down somewhere. Everybody needs to make sure they have these strategies written down somewhere. Okay, number 3. Number 3 says, which of these tree diagrams can be used to find the probability of getting any possible combination of 2 heads and 1 tails? So the first thing I need to do is I need to create my tree diagram. So I start with my first event. I have, I can, in the first flip of my coin, flip a heads or a tails. So that's my first event. Then in my second event, because the problem is asking which of these 3 diagrams is asking if I flip it 3 times. So the second event, I could flip a heads or a tails after I have flipped a heads, or I could flip a heads or a tails after I have flipped the tails in the first event. Moving on to the third event. The third event can either be heads or tails as well. So in the third event, I could flip a heads after I have flipped a heads and a heads already. I could flip a tails after I have flipped a heads and a heads already. I could flip a heads after I have flipped a tails and a heads. I can flip a tails after I have flipped a tails and after I have flipped a heads. Flipped a head after I roll a head and a tail. I can roll a tails after flipping a head and then a tail. I can flip a head after flipping a tail and then a tail. And I can flip a tail after flipping a tail and a tail. So these are all of the different outcomes of flipping a coin 3 different times. Flipping a coin 3 different times, 3 events. So I have listed out my sample space. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 outcomes. And within all of these outcomes, there are 3 different events. Well, referring back to the problem, the event that we're looking for, or the favorable outcome, is 2 heads and 1 tail. So in my sample space, I have starred all of the combinations that show 2 heads or 1 tail. 2 heads, 1 tail. And so I see that there are 3 different combinations that show 2 heads and 1 tail. So the correct answer on problem number 3 would be diagram A. Diagram B does not show all of the possible outcomes. It doesn't show how these possible outcomes could occur. So, and it also is not showing the stages within the compound event. So that's why B is incorrect. A is correct because it shows 1, 2, 3 different stages, 3 different events within this compound event. Okay, and the last problem on the Cardinals assignment, the last problem for everybody's notes, reads, Harry goes to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He can travel to school and back in 3 different ways: by Hogwarts Express, the flying car, the night bus, or, he can travel to school and back in 3 different ways: by the Hogwarts Express, a flying car, or the night bus. He decided to choose his methods of transportation to and from Hogwarts at random this year. Which of the tables lists all of the different ways Harry can go to Hogwarts and back? Well, to list the different ways, we need to create a tree diagram first with the event of him going to school. So he can take the express, the car, or the bus. Then we have the second event of him coming home, and he can take the express, the car, or the bus on the way home. So that means his sample space, or the different outcomes that can occur with these 2 events, there are 9 different outcomes, and they look like this when listed. Now, if I wanted to find the probability of each of these outcomes, I could say that the first event has a probability of 1 out of 3 occurring, and the second event also within it has a 1 out of 3 chance of occurring. So I multiply 1/3 times 1/3, and I get 9. Now, looking at these tables, both of these tables are correct. Both of these tables in the answer choices are correct because no 2 outcomes in the sample space are the same. No 2 outcomes in the sample space are the same. So each of these shows 9 repeating sample spaces. It is correct. Both of them are correct. Okay, my pro tip to you is to please download the Google Classroom app on your phone so that you can upload pictures of your notes and strategies onto Google Classroom using your phone. Use your phone. Make sure you have these notes. Please text me if you have any questions. Call me if you have any questions. Remember, Cardinals, this is your assignment. Everyone else, you are taking notes. Have a good day. See you later.